If you're someone who struggles with anxiety, then you're already familiar with the really common, well-known ways that it shows up in your life. So things like feeling fearful or worried or nervous a lot of the time, or maybe it shows up physically. So the pounding chest, the lightheaded feeling, the sweaty, the tingly, the jittery, that kind of agitated feeling. Those are the really common and well-known ways. But there are also some less known ways that are really common as well, but we don't usually realize that they are tied to anxiety. Now, the reason why I want to share these with you is because I was talking recently to one of my students who I'd been sharing this information with, and she said, I had no idea that what I was struggling with was anxiety. I thought I was just struggling with stress and overwhelm. But now understanding that the root of the issue is really anxiety, I know now that I can go forward and start doing things to deal with the anxiety, that I can start getting treatment, or that I can start getting help for my anxiety so that I don't have to be dealing with these other things that are going on in my life. So today we're going to talk about 11 common but less known, or maybe even sneaky ways that anxiety shows up in our lives. If you're new to me and this is the first time we're connecting, my name is Kristina, and I'm a registered therapist, researcher, and online course creator. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, and I work to help men and women get through the crap that is holding them back so they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And if you are someone who struggles with anxiety, you and I both know that anxiety is one of those big things that comes in and really can prevent us from liking ourselves and our lives. So let's talk about this. What are these less known but still very common ways that anxiety can show up in our lives? So the first one, we're going to go through 11 of them, but we'll go through them briefly so that you're not here all day. But the first one is avoiding anxiety-provoking situations. Now that might seem obvious, but a lot of the times avoiding situations that normally we'd like to be a part of, that we want to do, and just avoiding things that we really want to be doing, but there's this fear, there's this worry, there's this self-consciousness. We get in our heads about it and we talk ourselves out of it. Doing that regularly is often coming from anxiety. Now, I'm not talking about those situations that really do make us feel uncomfortable, that aren't good for us, that really, don't do anything for us, that are maybe even unhealthy for us, and that we're feeling nervous about that kind of stuff, and so we're avoiding it. That's obvious. But I'm talking about the things that maybe we want to be doing, but aren't, because we're feeling anxious or nervous or self-conscious or worried, maybe even unnecessarily worried about them. The next one is trying to be perfect and control everything. So I've talked about this before, that oftentimes anxiety is rooted in a lack of control. So when we feel like we don't have control over something, then we try to gain control to reduce the anxiety. So when we don't have control, we feel like we don't have control, we get really anxious. So then oftentimes what we do is we try to overcompensate for that by trying to over control a lot of things, or almost everything, or whatever it is. But trying to be perfect, trying to come across like we have it all together, like our lives are fully in order, or at least trying to get our lives there, and getting really worked up and overwhelmed, trying to control and appear, or at least make it look like, or make other people think that we are perfect and have it all together. That is rooted in anxiety. And there are a couple different types of general anxiety, and perfectionism is one of them. So we're not going to talk about too deeply about that today. That will be another talk for another day. But perfectionism, people who struggle with perfectionism, perfectionism is rooted in anxiety. The next one is multitasking, or being frantically busy. So if you're somebody who's always taking on a million things, always trying to do a million things, always running from one thing to the next, you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed and kind of frantic and really busy. Often, that can make us feel more anxious. Even talking about that makes me feel kind of worked up and anxious. But when we are trying to do so much and going around frantically busy, that makes us feel anxious. But it also is rooted in anxiety. And so number 4 is kind of different, or maybe on the opposite end of being frantically busy and trying to do so much, is not being able to start things. So often if you're someone who struggles to get going, maybe you procrastinate or you put things off or you avoid things that you want to be doing or you know you need to be doing, but you just can't get yourself to start. Did you know that that is rooted in anxiety? And then the next one, and the kind of other end of this same thing, is that maybe you have no problem starting things, but you just can't finish things. That you're great at starting things, but they get to a certain point and then you just kind of drop them or leave them. But it's not because you don't really feel like doing it or you don't want to do it, or you've lost interest or it's no longer important. It's that you want to be finishing it. You want to be tying it up. It's hanging over your head. It's driving you kind of crazy, but you just can't seem to finish it. So if you have a lot of unfinished business, unfinished projects, unfinished things in your life that feel like they're hanging over your head, that is a symptom of something deeper going on, which is likely anxiety. And then our next one, number 6, and this is social withdrawal. So if you avoid a lot of social situations, not necessarily because you don't feel like going or you're not really interested in the activity, but I'm talking about avoiding situations that you may actually want to be a part of, things that you want to do, things that you want to have in your life, but even just the thought of participating in them, even the thought of doing them makes you feel nervous or worried or self-conscious. And so you end up withdrawing quite a bit. You end up probably spending a lot of time alone and closed off. And not because you want to. There's some people that actually do like a lot of alone time and that really thrive off of that. But you're not doing it out of choice. You're doing it out of anxiety, out of fear, because you don't feel like you can go out and do the things that you really want to be doing. So you withdraw. And then number 7 is getting overwhelmed and either getting snappy or irritated really easily or crying really easily. So if you're somebody who notices yourself just getting snappy or kind of rude or irritated or just falling into a puddle of tears at the drop of a pin, chances are it's because you're feeling anxious and you've got this anxiety going on and your emotions are right up here at the surface. And so the smallest of thing kind of comes in and you've got no room to cope. You've got no capacity to cope with it. And so you have some kind of disproportionate or unhelpful emotional reaction that later on you end up feeling guilty about. But in the moment, you get overwhelmed. You're already feeling overwhelmed. And so you get overwhelmed with this emotion and don't know how to cope. And then the next one is being hypervigilant. So I'm not talking about being diligent and prepared and careful and responsible. I'm talking about being like overly vigilant, overly nervous, overly careful, checking things several times, over preparing for certain situations and making like mile-long lists for maybe even just going on a day hike or something, that whatever it is, being overly vigilant and trying to plan for every single thing that could happen, and then getting almost paralyzed in preparation mode or in planning mode. So that's being overly hypervigilant. That is oftentimes rooted in anxiety. And then number 9 is undersleeping. And now, if you are somebody who struggles with anxiety, you probably know this one really well, that you either have a hard time falling asleep or you fall asleep okay, but then you wake up in the night and can't get back to sleep, that your thoughts start going, or you just feel really awake, but then the next day you're exhausted. So undersleeping, not being able to sleep, not being able to get good quality sleep is rooted in anxiety. It can often be rooted in depression as well, but usually depression is when people struggle with oversleeping and sleeping too much and not being able to get out of bed, but not even actually having good quality sleep. But then anxiety is often not being able to sleep at all, or at least not very much. So then our next one is being unable to be alone. So if you're somebody or you know somebody who gets really nervous or really uncomfortable if they're ever alone, either in social situations or when they're out in their community or out at different events or even doing whatever, if they always have to have someone with them, even just going to the grocery store or even at home where they just don't want to be alone at home. And now there's a difference between liking having company and liking having people around and getting really fearful or getting really nervous or getting really scared when you are alone. That is often, again, a symptom of anxiety. And then our next one, number 11, and we might have a bonus one here, so stick around for that. Our next one is seeking reassurance. And I'm not talking about wanting to get praise and recognition where praise and recognition are due. I'm talking about being almost obsessed with needing reassurance, always checking, like, was this good enough? Did I do this okay? Did I screw up? Did I say something and offended someone? Was that okay to do that? Was that okay to say that? Was that okay? And we're always sort of double checking. We're always kind of wondering, and we're always sort of seeking out that reassurance. Now, there is a fine line between wanting to be recognized and wanting to make sure that we haven't offended anyone and almost getting obsessed with it, getting stuck in our heads about it, and almost getting paralyzed by needing that reassurance that we're doing all right, or that we're not screwing up, or that we're not offending people, or that we're not making a mess of something, or that something is good enough. So those are our 11. Those are our 11 ways, common but less known ways that anxiety shows up in our lives. That if you're experiencing any or many of these things, that these are symptoms of anxiety. And then our last one, our kind of bonus one, and this is a really important one because this is what a lot of people deal with. And this is any kind of addiction or self-medicating. So people who take prescription drugs, not as directed, like overusing prescription drugs, or people that are struggling with addiction issues, if it's alcohol addiction, if it's drug addiction, if it's gambling addiction, like there's all different kinds of addictions. And if you know this, if you know about addiction, that addiction is rarely just about the behavior itself. It's oftentimes a way of coping with some kind of mental health struggle. That they're called concurrent disorders. So usually people who are struggling with addiction have a concurrent disorder. So they're struggling with some kind of mental health struggle and they're using the substance or the behavior, the addictive behavior, to avoid, numb, or cope with that deeper issue. So to be aware of this, if you're somebody who's like, why am I addicted? Or even like food addiction, self-medicating with food, with overeating. And you're like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just, not drink so much or not eat so much or not use these drugs or whatever it is, like all the time? Why do I rely on this? Why can't I just stop? Well, there's the habit part of it. There's the addictive, cognitive, chemical thing going on. But then there's also the self-medicating part, that there's something deeper going on, and both of those need to be addressed at the same time concurrently because they are concurrent disorders. So I hope that you found this helpful. And I do have a handout for you. I have a tip sheet on 7 effective ways to manage anxiety when you notice anxiety kind of coming up. Just some really simple but effective ways to help bring you down to feeling a little more grounded, feeling a little more calm, feeling a little bit more like yourself. And you can grab that. I'm going to stick that in the notes. So make sure that you grab that. And also come on over to Facebook. Join our Facebook group, goodformegroup.com, where we focus on mindset, where we focus on mindfulness and mental wellness. It's an incredibly supportive, engaging, and fun group of men and women. So do be sure to join us there. Like the video, share your comments, share your thoughts. Would love to hear from you if any of this was surprising, if any of this turned on some light bulbs for you and was helpful for you. Leave it in the comment section below and do subscribe to the channel so that we can stay connected. Until next time, take good care.